Further ado, again, thank you for your patience, y'all. Let's go ahead and jump straight in to our masterclass for this evening. So that's me. Obviously, as you can see, my name is Bart. I'm the verbal coordinator here at Blue Ivy for the test prep team. A little just quick background about myself. I'm coming up on my 5th year now of working at Blue Ivy since the middle of the pandemic in 2020. So when I joined. Originally, I'm from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So if any of y'all are in South Florida, Miami, you know that is home to me as well. Though Mexico City is where I call home now. I did the same exact job for 3 years prior to this in Shanghai. So I used to live in China, where I was also working in the same field, academic coordinator for the test center there with SAT prep, GRE, GMAT, all the same stuff that I do now with Blue Ivy. So I've got over 8-9 years in the field and over 10 years of tutoring experience. But that's enough about me. Let's talk a little bit about Blue Ivy. Here's my annotator here, just in case I need him. All right, so Blue Ivy, as you guys hopefully all know, as I'm sure our amazing ops team, marketing team have informed you all, is a coaching group, right? Preparing students for academic excellence across the board. That includes things such as test prep, which obviously I'm in charge of. We're going to be talking a lot about tonight, but we also offer plenty of programs related to college success and university orientation, obviously college applications, helping you with our amazing Pathways program, which helps certain select students find their ways to different universities as well. So our mission, like it says there, is to help our students achieve their full academic potential and reach their goals across the board, whether it's subject tutoring or test prep or whatever else. You'll have to pardon me. Long couple weeks of classes has left my voice feeling pretty raspy, but yes, as it says there, then our goal, our most important mission is to help our students reach whatever goals they have. So that is Blue Ivy in a nutshell. And as much as I've seen our company grow and change over 5 years, that mission has always stayed exactly the same. Something I'm very, very proud to be a part of as well. So here is just a brief list of some of the top schools that our students have been accepted to, that we've helped these students across the board from, test prep, A to Z. What schools are you even looking at? What schools might you qualify to get into? A bunch of Ivies, as y'all can see there: Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Stanford, USC, UPenn, UC Berkeley, NYU. The list goes on, right? Tufts, Toronto, London School of Economics. We place students abroad in Bocconi as well. I think EA, we've had a few students over there in Madrid. So we have plenty of connections all around the world. Obviously, our focus is helping students get into the absolute top 50, top 20 elite schools in the US. But we have an international presence that we are always expanding as well, something we're also very proud of, that international footprint. So the reason we're here tonight is to talk about the SAT, right? A lot of you have maybe heard there have been a lot of changes to the SAT in recent years, or the SAT doesn't matter anymore because none of the schools are taking it, blah, blah, blah. It's an updating process, right? Since the pandemic, I think a lot of things about the SAT have changed, but one thing still remains the same. It is one of the crucial indicators that schools use for acceptances into college, plain and simple, right? Many schools after the pandemic went test optional. Many of those schools now, especially the top and best universities that you want to be getting into in the first place, many of them are going back to test mandatory. Some are test aware, test optional, that's fine. There are a few schools out there that are test blind, but the vast majority of them are going back to test mandatory, meaning you need to submit those scores. We want to see your SAT scores because though there's been some discourse about it in recent years, the SAT is still a really fantastic measurement of like an average idea of what a student's performance will be in their first year of college. That's why it is the scholastic aptitude test, right? That it is testing more or less how the student will perform when they get into college. That's why it's still an absolutely invaluable tool for most admissions officers when they're gauging certain applicants, especially out of state, or not out of state, sorry, international applicants as well. So how do we get ready to take this exam? Just like any test in school, you're not going to sit down and just, I don't know, let me take it and say a small prayer and hope for the best, right? Sure, you could do so, but without like coming to this with preparation, coming to it with an idea of what's going to be on this type of test, it's going to be a lot harder to achieve the type of elite score that makes you stand out. And as we know, as an international student, you want to stand out even more because there's certain hurdles that you may need to face. So what are some of the best strategies when you're taking the exam? Practice makes perfect. And something I preach to my students every single day of my life is that you got to practice like you want to perform on test day. Practice like you're going to play on game day, just like all the best coaches say, right? So practice makes perfect. Practice independently, practice when it's guided by a coach. These are going to be some of the core tenets for sure when it comes to taking the actual exam, preparing for an exam. Setting a goal, also something that we work very directly on. Every one of our students that joins our test prep program takes a diagnostic exam before they start their classes, which means we set exactly where you're at. And then we look at the schools you want to get into. We want to think about a realistic goal that you can achieve. And we set that goal from jump to say, if you're starting out with 1150 with me and with one of our amazing math coaches, and you want to get to a 1350, a 1450, here's what we need to do. Here's how we're going to accomplish that goal. One of the simple ways we accomplish that goal is by defining a study plan, right? If you have a clear idea of each step that you're going to take along the way, that makes it a whole lot easier to follow that plan than just saying, I don't know, let's take some practice tests and kind of look at how they go, right? We want a clear set of steps for your student to follow so that they know exactly what it is they need to be doing. And something that I, again, preach to all of our other coaches and trainings and ongoing trainings, et cetera, is easy dubs, quick wins. So I'm constantly preaching, where's the low-hanging fruit of the exam? This question, you can skip the passage and just look for the goal they give you in the question. Sweet, let's go straight to that. I don't even need to bother reading through all the bullet points. This is a question where maybe you're not so great at reading poetry, but if there's positive words embedded all throughout that poem, then I'm going to look for all the negative answers that I can start by eliminating. Quick wins, simplifying the process to make your life easier or the student's life easier as they're working, right? These are some of the simple strategies that we use to try and get ready to take the exam. Okay. How to take the exam versus how to conquer the test, right? These are some of the other things in our first few lessons that especially we tend to focus on. The test format and question types. If I give you a blueprint for the exam you're going to be taking, that's going to make your life a whole lot easier. What I often hear from students in the first couple lessons when we talk about their practice tests or their diagnostic, or if they've taken the exam before without very much prep, is I don't even know what to do. They gave me some long passage from Moby Dick, and I couldn't even read it, let alone figure out what the question was asking me to figure out. If you know exactly each question type and you have a set of strategies for how to attack each question type, your foot's already in the door. Now you're not thinking about what's the goal here? What's the purpose of this question? Instead, you've done that 200 times with me in classes. You know exactly how you're going to attack that question. So understanding simple things like the test format, the question types that they're going to throw at you, that already makes you a level up because your brain power is going to be put towards answering the actual question rather than trying to figure out what the heck they want you to do in the first place. So that's something simple, just understanding exactly what the test format is. Other test skills that we're always preaching, skimming, scanning, syntax, right? Skimming is maybe still important. On the verbal section, we have 71 seconds per question on average. I don't know about you, but if I had to read a Shakespeare sonnet that I've never seen in 71 seconds, it would take a good bit of time for me to work through that and figure it out. I would imagine it'd be the same for y'all, right? So skimming versus scanning, finding certain details, etc. These are important skills. Analyzing syntax is what I do in almost every first class with my students. If you can't find me independent clauses, you definitely can't tell me how to use semicolons. So things like syntax, the simple rules of grammar are the basis, right? The kind of fundamental building blocks for how you can start to conquer this test with confidence and not just say, I don't know, the pause sounds okay for that comma. No, what rules can you use to explain it? Things like that. Answer elimination is king on any standardized test. Doesn't matter if it's the SAT, the TOEFL, the SSAT, the GMAT, the GRE, the MCAT, the LSAT. If you have an A, B, C, D option, you're not telling me why B is right until you're telling me why A, C, and D are wrong. That's something we train on extensively for sure. I know that my math coaches are constantly preaching how amazing it is to use Desmos, which is the graphing calculator built into the College Board's app that you take the exam on. Basically, I've had some students I've heard that finish the exam with half the time or finish the module, especially module one, with half the time remaining because they didn't have to sit down and write anything out by hand. They literally just plug it into Desmos and that saves them tons of time. Right? So how to use the graphing calculator, skills for how to use that to your advantage to save you time on what would take 3 minutes by hand, might take 30 seconds with the graphing calculator if you know how to use it, right? It's not necessarily self-explanatory. That's something I know the math teachers hit on all the time. And I think the biggest hurdle for any exam is speed versus accuracy. What I always tell my students is that speed and accuracy, you got to rob one to pay the other when you work on these exams, right? Because if I have 71 seconds per question, that means I need to move my ass. I need to be fast. I need to be going. But at the same time, I want to slow down my process enough to try to explain step by step why each answer works and doesn't. And so finding that right balance between speed and accuracy, it's something that you have to perfect on any exam that you're working on, right? So these are just some of the key things that we constantly are drilling in our lessons with students for SAT. We've talked a little bit about this, but we can do also a quick kind of breakdown for y'all here about the kind of core structure of the exam. Maybe some of you guys are not so familiar with the new digital SAT. When I took the SAT 100 years ago, it was 3 versions of it ago, right? And maybe some of you had students who have graduated high school in the last 10 years, but you have other students who are kind of coming through that are a few years later. So previously, the SAT used to have these long reading passages. I'm talking 100 lines of a speech by Abraham Lincoln, and then there would be 10 or 11 questions connected to that. Now, they've been an overhaul for the new digital version of the SAT. No longer is it taken on paper. Everything is taken on a laptop or an iPad or whatever else in the testing center or in school. The big difference is that they've made the exam a lot shorter, and then they've also made the questions discrete from one another on both reading and math. So that's an amazing thing for us as trainers for the exam or students taking the exam, because now if I get that Shakespeare sonnet and I read through it, I'm like, cool, I have no idea what that means. I'm lost entirely. Great, skip that question. Maybe there's a vocab question where it's 4 words in the answers that you've never seen before. Cool, you lose. Oh, well, it's going to happen to anyone on the exam, right? Then you just skip it and focus on something else that you can go get right, that you can focus on instead. So that's one of the nice changes, the big changes overall. Obviously, some of the other basic structural things y'all can see here. We have 4 modules, 2 reading and writing, 10-minute break, and then 2 math. Each module is going to be scored up to 800. You put those 2 together to get your 1600 score, right? And so the exam with that 10-minute break is going to take just under 2.5 hours for most students to take it. Reading and writing, everything you see here is more or less going to be the same. The main changes are going to be in terms of the speed. Math, you've got 95 seconds on average per question. So you do need a little bit more time to kind of work your way through that. Whereas with reading and writing, we have 71 seconds per question, right? 64 minutes, 54. But the big difference, this is something I always am preaching to students to understand. The digital SAT is very different from a normal test that a student might take in school, because most tests they take are going to just be a linear exam where there's maybe 50 questions, right? And if you get 45 out of 50 questions, you got a 90%. But the SAT doesn't work that way. The reason that we have a module 1 and a module 2 between each of the reading and writing and math sections is because module 1 is kind of a normal mixture of questions, right? It's going to be some easy, some medium, some hard. So yeah, there's going to be some really tough science passages in there or really confusing graphs that you have to match to an argument or whatever else. But there's also going to be some pretty easy pronoun questions that you can kind of pick up some time and bank some time based on the fact that, okay, it's versus there. I know that it's rather than there, something like that, right? But module 2 then is going to adapt the difficulty of the questions based on the student's performance in module 1. You need to get about 70% right or more in module 1 for verbal. It's a little lower threshold in math. It's going to be about 60% or more. But basically, if you do well enough in module 1, then module 2 is only going to feed you the hardest possible questions. That makes things a little bit tougher, right? Because now there's no longer that easy, it's their question or whatever for me to pick up time. Every question is a flamethrower, is meant to kind of kick your butt a little bit, right? But we want that harder second module because that opens up the top level of scores to the student. If you don't do so hot in module 1, let's say you maybe only get about half the questions right, 13 out of 27 questions that you got correct. That means you're going to get easier questions in module 2. But even if you get every single question right in module 2, there's still going to be a ceiling. There's going to be a cap to your score about 600. It's very difficult to break the 600 ceiling from the easy module. Basically impossible, right? As far as I can tell, it's never happened. If you get the easy module for the second module, you're not going to score above a 600. Is that a respectable score? Sure. But it's not really a pathway to scoring above 1,300, which is what I think a lot of the best schools are going to be looking for, 1,300 plus at minimum, right? So we want that harder second module. For both reading and writing and for math, it's going to be the same thing. You've got to do well enough in module 1 to get that harder module 2. If you don't get that, that kind of limits your experience. But in my experience, none of my students really get module 2 easy. After a few weeks worth of lessons, we kind of have a few strategies, ways to like raise the floor of the student score so that even if they get slammed with some crazy, really hard reading questions or, they just have a really tough time on certain things, we often focus on the kind of like repeatable rules that you can break down in the first few lessons so that no matter what, you're probably going to be getting enough questions right to get into the harder second module. So the focus on our first few weeks of class is always is raise the floor. So at the very least, you're getting that harder second module, setting yourself up for a chance to break into that high 600, 700 score. That's more or less everything else here. Reading and writing, multiple choice. It's always multiple choice no matter what. So we're always eliminating to find the best answer. On math, there will be a third of the questions that are free response. So students do have to arrive at a number and enter a number in. That does make a little bit of a difference there. But that's the kind of core structure. I'll slow down, by the way, guys. I'm coming off a group class and a whole bunch of caffeine here. So I'll also pause to say if anybody has any questions, I'll also give you guys a couple options. I'm also happy to stick around. Whatever questions you have, if you want to speak a little more directly, I'll stick around, of course, afterward to field your questions. But if anybody has a question so far, now would be a great time if you want to throw them out there. Hopefully not. All right, well, let's keep going. One of the other things then that I mentioned to you guys that we know is changing quite rapidly, even within the last couple months. I know, for instance, I don't see Penn on here, but University of Pennsylvania, another Ivy, for instance, I think a month ago, maybe less than a month ago, announced that they will also be returning to SAT mandatory. So the vast majority of schools that we're seeing, right, in I think all the public schools in the state of Florida. So maybe some of you guys are located in Miami. We know that UF, all like the New College of Florida, all public schools, I think in in the state of Florida, as well as in Georgia. My alma mater, my beloved Georgia Bulldogs. I'm actually pardon, I'm actually like closely involved with the Alumni Association here in Mexico City, and I'm the VP of student recruiting for the alumni here in Mexico City. I recently met with the the international admissions officer for UGA just to kind of pick her brain. And what she was saying is all of the UGA, or not, sorry, all of the Georgia system of public schools, all of the Florida system, I believe UNC Chapel Hill has just gone back. A few others you guys can see, University of Texas at Austin, Georgia Tech, which though they might be my hated rivals, we got to give them credit. They're one of the best, engineering schools in the country. So whether it's a public college, a private college, what have you, the majority of the best schools are returning to SAT mandatory. So while before there were some that were SAT optional, meaning they would consider your score, but they didn't require you to send them in, I would say a good majority of the top 50 schools are returning to SAT mandatory. Now, if your student or your child wants to go to a specific school, I would definitely recommend. You can always find anything about specific schools on their admissions website. So if your student has their heart set on going to University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, for instance, all you need to do is go on Ann Arbor's website and take a closer look at their requirements. One thing we do know is that the California system of schools is actually SAT blind. They are one of the major exceptions. The California schools like UCLA or UC Berkeley, they are the UC system, UC Davis, UC Chico, whatever. They are SAT blind, meaning even if you get a perfect score, they will not consider your score in the application. But they are, though they seem to be kind of a leader in this about 5-6 years ago, they seem certainly to be the exception now. So aside from the UC system of schools, I would say the majority of top schools are going back. I believe Caltech is also SAT mandatory. So if your student wants to be at the top engineering schools, MIT or Caltech, they're all requiring the SAT for sure now. Okay. Here, I know we can share these slides with you if anybody needs them. We have a full list right here from the College Board. If you wanted to check which schools definitely do require it, check a specific school's website, of course, or there's a complete list there that y'all can also get to. So the reason I brought up the fact that I work with the admissions office at UGA, my job with them is not job, I'm a volunteer, just love to sing the praises of the University of Georgia. It's done a whole lot for me in my life. But one of the most important things or the most interesting things when I was talking to the head of international admissions there a couple weeks ago, was she said scholarships are the biggest reason for students to submit their SAT scores other than, of course, acceptance. Even if their SAT score perhaps is in the lower range, maybe, of that school's kind of acceptance rate, we know that SATs are not only for acceptance, but for scholarships. You can get all kinds of money to attend school if your SAT is strong, especially if you're coming from outside of the country. International scholarships apply in a different way. This chart, as y'all can see right here, does apply to first-year domestic and international students. But as you can see, we don't get as much as ACT as much anymore outside of the US, but SAT obviously is still wildly popular. But even for students that are scoring somewhere around 1190 under a 1200, if your GPA is still strong enough, that 3.5 weighted, you can be looking at up to $23,000 of scholarships, right? If you're scoring a 1400 or higher and your GPA is really high, you can get 30 grand, free money. I love free money. I'm sure all y'all do too. College is not cheap in the US, as we all know. So scholarships are a huge, huge, huge reason to sit for the SAT, to sit for standardized tests in general. Even if your student is considering the ACT, this is a major thing that I believe is overlooked by a lot of families, a lot of students when they think about this exam. Oh, my school doesn't need it, and it takes a lot of hard work to get ready for. Yeah, it's true. But you can get a lot of scholarship money based in both private and certain public scholarships that are available, just based off the fact that you have a strong SAT score. Again, Chanel, the woman at UGA that I was talking to, was saying students are always shocked at how much money they can actually get just by having a strong SAT score in the first place, because that can really differentiate. It can really set you apart from the pack, not only in the admissions field, but of course in getting some money too. If you are thinking, well, this all sounds well and good, the SAT is all interesting, but I would much prefer to live in Madrid. I don't know. I kind of think that my student wants to go live in Milan, right? All the schools you see on the screen and more also accept the SAT. So, of course, your Oxfords, your Cambridges of the world, University of Amsterdam, they'll take SAT scores. You don't need to go through like the British system of A levels or whatever to apply and be accepted to Oxford or Cambridge, right? Bocconi, another one I mentioned, that's in Milan, if I'm not mistaken, accepts the SAT. I've also worked with a lot of students to help them get into grad schools in Bocconi. We have a relationship with them for sure. University of Toronto, they're a Canadian school. Toronto's an amazing city, would be an amazing, University of Toronto, I think, is one of the best schools in all of Canada as well. They accept the SAT. Tec de Monterrey, I'm sure anybody in Mexico is familiar with them. One of the best schools here accepts SAT. Technical University of Munich, EA in Madrid. Again, many students looking at going over to Spain, living in Madrid. And so all of these schools accept the SAT. A lot of students have that idea that it's just for the US. And if I want to go anywhere other than the US, it's not going to help me. It's not worth putting in the effort. Absolutely something that can help you, especially as an alternative path, because some of these schools have really difficult entrance exams of their own, and they may accept the SAT in lieu of that, right? So if your student wants to apply to a few schools in Europe, to the best schools in the States and Europe across the pond, the SAT can work for that as well. Well, here we have something as a study hack. Oh, sorry, y'all. I'm just revising the chat. I think, Claudia, you're on top of that in the chat there. I just saw there's a few questions here. This is something I preach to a lot of students. This is something I like to talk about in general, because this is something that maybe some of y'all have heard. It's pretty well known in popular science, but I always like to bring it up because it is absolutely crucial to preparing long-term for things, right? No student's going to take 2 weeks of class and get better at the SAT, 2 hours, 3 hours worth of class. Sure, it's not going to hurt, but most of our students are preparing months and months in advance, right? And so something that maybe y'all have heard of before is this forgetting curve, as you can see here, which is that after about 20 minutes of reading something, studying something, trying your best to learn that thing, it takes only about 20 minutes for about 65% of that information to just delete itself from your brain, right? 65% or 35% gone after 20 minutes. After an hour, we're already under 50% of retention. Whether if I gave you a list of 10 vocabulary words to memorize or comma rules to memorize, or if I said, okay, the area of a triangle is 1/2 base height. 20 minutes from now, half of y'all might not even remember that, right? Because that's how the forgetting curve is what we call it works. 60 minutes, you're already at 50% retention or lower. Within a day, it's under 30. And within a week, you're looking at somewhere between 10 and 20%, right? So The reason I will always bring this up with many of my students is because we don't want to fall into the trap of the forgetting curve. Two learning kind of concepts that we use then to kind of pedagogical ideas here are going to be prescriptivism and descriptivism. Without getting too technical on y'all tonight, prescriptivism, basically, we could say, is just learning through repetition, but enforced repetition over time. Not just if I told you memorize this thing. For instance, our coordinating conjunctions, the fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. I often tell my students, I want you to repeat these to yourself when you're going to sleep at night, till you're muttering them in your brain, right? In your dreams. What are the fanboys? But no, prescriptivism doesn't just mean rote memorization. It means returning to something again and again over time, right? Another example I like to use with my GRE students, GRE is the hardest possible vocab I've ever faced on any exam, right? But what they need to do is learn up to 1,000 words within a couple months if they want to be successful on that test. SAT, it's maybe not so many words. The vocab is obviously a crucial component of it, right? But the question I always ask them is this. Let's say I give you a list of 100 words and you need to have them known, learned, and memorized by next week at exactly this time. Are you going to be better off trying to learn 15 to 20 words a day and then reviewing and adding a few more in every single day? Or would it be better to try to do 50 words on Saturday and 50 words on Tuesday and hope that you learn all of them in that 150-word session? Of course not, right? So the idea of prescriptivism, y'all, is that it's about learning something at first and then returning to it, coming back to it, right? Understanding it by reinforcing your memory over time so that it encodes into that long-term memory. Descriptivism, this is really just the concept of learning the jargon of something, right? When we talk about jargon or slang, for instance, I'm a huge NBA fan. Love my Miami Heat, even though we're having a relatively depressing season this year. But why am I bringing this up? Slang, right? Terminology. If I use terminology like Bam Adebayo is one of the best fives in the league. He can score from the nail. He can defend 1 through 5, and he's great at switching in the post, etc. The nail, 5. These are terms you guys know. You know the words, but you don't know what I'm talking about if you don't know basketball, right? So descriptivism is basically this idea that many specific topics have a lot of jargon that you need to learn. But this is where a lot of the kind of prep for the SAT comes in. If you know what it means to identify a part to whole purpose question, now you need to think a whole lot less about what you're meant to do. If you can understand exactly what it means when I say it's a comma fanboys, not a fanboys on its own, that's a very specific terminology that's very particular to grammar, right? If I ask you the difference between an independent and a dependent clause, that's going to make a whole big difference, right? If we share the same kind of vocabulary. So descriptivism essentially is learning the terminology of a very specific concept. If you match prescriptivism, returning, refreshing your memory, reinforcing learning over time with descriptivism, which is kind of becoming an expert in that specific subject, becoming an expert in the exam, we're going to leave behind the forgetting curve and we're going to instead come to what we call the remembering curve, like you see right here, right? Where sure, you're going to forget plenty of things, but if you keep encoding into long-term memory, you are going to be remembering more and more and more over time. That's going to be the key to success on anything that you're preparing for, whether it's your AP chemistry exam or whether it's the SAT or anything that your student is working on. It's about returning, becoming an expert in the source information, and then returning to reinforce that information over time. If you can match those two things, we're no longer going to fall into the trap of the forgetting curve, and then we're going to be following that remembering curve instead. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully we didn't get too pedagogical, too teachery on you guys there. Let's return then to talking about a few more things with numbers, right? So Blue Ivy, what do we know about our SAT program? Pardon me. Well, as y'all can see right here, weekly individual sessions. I'm meeting with your student. The math teacher's meeting with your student for 2 hours, at least once a week. If you need an intensive, sometimes we have boot camps over the summer where we're meeting multiple days a week. But the vast majority of the time, we're meeting 2 hours of math, 2 hours of verbal every single week as often as we can. Again, prescriptivism, right? Meeting regularly is the key to this. Now, in addition to those weekly individual sessions, we're not just sitting, chatting, hanging out, right? We have an app which targets the practice to boost your score outside of class. So inside of class, we're explaining certain fundamental concepts, question types, the strategies that you can use for them. Outside of class, then we have an entire practice platform that we are partnered with, an amazing platform called Test Innovators, which gives the students anywhere between 30 to 60 minutes worth of homework in each subject each week. So I'm going to be assigning 3 or 4 exercises related to commas, 3 or 4 exercises related to transitions, and 3 or 4 exercises related to rhetorical synthesis questions. And that's the student's homework. Next week, we're going to spend the first 30 to 45, maybe 60 minutes, however long we need, of that class going back over homework. You learned a strategy last week. This week, then you're going to do the homework in between to practice that strategy, to understand those skills. Next week, when we meet, we're going to go back over what you missed, what you struggled on, what you didn't understand, to clean up that strategy, to make sure you know exactly how to employ that strategy, so that next time, a few weeks down the line, when you take a practice test, you can use that strategy under pressure and at speed, right? And it's this kind of scaffolding that we train all the coaches on here at Blue Ivy to make sure that you teach something, the student practices on their own, and then we review something to make sure that we can review mistakes, analyze errors, and understand how to keep moving forward from there. And then, of course, the second half of class, we're going to go over some more concepts, new practice, whatever we need to get your student across the line. Here you have a specific student, Noah, I believe was his name. Yeah, this was one of our amazing coaches. Danielle worked with him, as well as I think Milu and Enrique for math. That's neither here nor there. So this is a student that came to us with a 1060 diagnostic. Before he took any classes, before he did anything, he sat down, he took the SAT practice test, started at a 1060. Relatively low, but not the end of the world, right? Definitely a decent enough kind of platform to begin from. After taking multiple practice tests, you can see his score going up and up and up and up. By the end of the program, not only his practice tests, working weekly with both of his coaches, he finished with a 1490 official exam. That is incredible. 1060 to 1490. Hell yeah, is what I would say to that, right? So 740 reading and writing, that means he probably got about 5 questions wrong total on the exam. 750 math probably means even fewer questions, maybe 1 or 2 things. Maybe you didn't carry a negative, who knows? But ultimately, to start at a 1060, a relatively low score, and finish on the official exam at a 1490 is a testament to the fact that even students who start with a really low level feel really kind of like discouraged. Oh, I'm starting at 900. I'm starting at 1100. I'll never get to that 1500 score. I'll never be able to apply to Yale or Stanford or UT Austin. Says who? Put in the hard work and see where you get, right? You got to give yourself the chance. So it's a testament to the fact that if the student brings the hard work to the classes, like what I always say is you get what you put in. You get out of it what you put into it, right? And if they're willing to work hard, take the practice test, complete the exercises in between classes, the possibility for growth is always going to be there. All right. Here is a great example of what our practice platform looks like. So here you can see on that platform, we have 10 practice tests. Now, there are 7 official practice tests given out or that are free available from the College Board. We use those very much as well. In fact, the College Board just released 4 new ones about a month ago. And because I'm a huge nerd for the SAT, I've been eating, reading, sleeping those new exams ever since, right? Learning all the changes, learning all the updates. But in addition to those 7, the problem with those 7 is that some students need way more practice than that. 7 timed practice tests is great, but some students will burn through that within a semester or even less time. And so we have this practice platform that has 10 full timed mock exam practice tests that we can use. And then in addition to that, there's another 500 hours of practice exercises, right? So the way that my students tend to work it is that we're going to go no more than 3 to 4 weeks at a time without a mock exam, a practice test fully timed. But in between that, I'm going to be using a lot of those practice exercises to assign his homework, like we said, so that if I teach, for instance, the class I was just in, we just worked on transitions. What's the difference between a contrast versus a cause and effect versus a main idea continuer? How do you label the different examples of a transition with those simple categories, right? They're going to go home. They're going to practice labeling and applying that on certain exercises. And then next week, they're going to take a practice test to try and do that at speed, right? With the pressure of the clock ticking as well. So it's something that we've been building as a program, Blue Ivy, our SAT, of making sure that we use as many mock exams and practice tests as we can get, in addition to those practice exercises, so that students get untimed practice to kind of nail down the skills. And then they get time practice to kind of learn how to manage their pacing and also manage the pressure, right? It's a whole lot different when you see the seconds ticking away than if you have, 5, 6 minutes to work on a question. So it's all about that balance, right? As y'all can see, one of my very, very, very favorite things about each of the modules that we can attack here, there's a breakdown of the difficulty of questions you missed, each of the content areas, craft and structure, information ideas, standard English conventions, and something I use extensively on Test Innovators. They do not have this on any of the practice tests with Blue Book, with the College Board. Test Innovators has a timing graph. So I can see exactly how much time the student took on every single question. Oh, great. You spent 4 minutes on one grammar question. Let's go straight there because that was where you hit a wall and that's what you got stuck on. Oh, here, you spent 24 seconds on something that usually takes students a minute and a half. You went too quickly. You made a sloppy error. Let's talk about how we can correct that, right? So this timing graph is something that I know our coaches love, students love as well, because it gives you a really, really key breakdown that allows us, again, like it says here, to use data to figure this out, not just in the homework, in the mock exams as well. We're always trying to work smarter, not harder, right? So being able to pinpoint what that specific issue is means I'm not just running through a curriculum from week 1 to week 10 with every student. Once they start taking more mock exams, I'm figuring out the specific thing that that student needs help in, and we're attacking that directly. If your student can do main idea questions, I'm not going to run them through a main idea question. I'm not going to run them through the lesson on that. But if they're struggling with inferences questions, drawing logical conclusions, then we're going to attack that straight away so that we can tailor it specifically to whatever your student needs, right? This is a simple little graph, as y'all can see here, kind of the bell curve of improvements for our students across the board. Obviously, about 5% of our students are seeing improvements up to close to 400 points, right? Not everybody can be a Noah of the world, though. I would say here, you see the majority of our students, at least over 100 points improvement. That's not even that hard. If I teach your kid how to use commas and semicolons, they're going to see 50, 60, 70 points improvement most of the time on the grammar section alone, right? Let alone reading and all the other things that we work with. But more students are going to be looking at 165 to even 200 plus points of improvement, right? Between learning the math skills that they need, the verbal section skills that they need, and how to manage the pacing for both of those. It's very typical for us to see students who come in at 1100 and finish around 1300 plus on their official exam, just a few exam dates, 1 or 2 exam dates later. So this is just kind of a basic graph showing some of the improvements that our students have been able to achieve. Well, we don't have a ton of time left tonight, but before we wrapped up, I wanted to show you guys, to give you guys a little bit of a taste test of how it works when we work on SAT questions with certain strategies, how you can attack these questions, and what some of the things your students actually have to do when they sit for the exam. It's a headache. It's not an easy exam to prepare for in the first place, but we're going to take this one away for now. Let's focus on a vocab question. Everybody loves vocab, right? Vocab's so fun. Let's plug a word in. Read it 4 times, plug the word in. No, we're not going to do it that way. Word and context questions like this are not testing on the meaning of the answer choice, right, y'all? Instead, they are testing on which word works best in the actual passage itself. So some of the skills, some of the strategies here, and I'm not going to call on all y'all because there's way too many people in here, but I am going to ask for some volunteers. So if I throw some questions out there, please do not hesitate to respond. Get in the team spirit here of working on some SAT questions. So if we look at this word in context, this vocab question here, number 5, there's a few crucial structural elements that we can break down. So I'll give everybody a moment. Take maybe 30 seconds, 45 seconds. Just read that paragraph. And then I'm going to kind of lead you guys into a few of the things that we need to make a prediction for what the answer should be. All right, well, hopefully that's enough time for everybody to have read through the paragraph. Okay, so a couple of the strategies that we preach when it comes to vocab questions, word and context questions, start just by thinking about if you need a positive, negative, or neutral word here. Anybody feel like they can chime in? What tone of word are we required to plug into this blank? Positive, negative, or neutral?
Negative.
Why negative, Henry?
Because it says the role isn't So it's like it's not something negative.
Maybe. It could also say that the role isn't amazing. The role isn't spectacular, right? You're
Well,
right.
yeah, but it also has rather after, which also makes it good.
Exactly. That's the next thing I was going to point out then. Rather is a contrast transition. Rather is telling us the opposite or the inverse of something, right? And it's not just do you know the meaning of the words, but can you break down the structure of the sentence, the structure of the paragraph, and use that to generate the right prediction? So if rather is creating a contrast to the other side of that semicolon, then I'm going to read the second half there really carefully. Because what this tells me is rather this accessory spleen, this part of the whale or something, whatever that is, may actively support diving mechanisms. What's the opposite of active? Not active, right? Occasionally, they're going to give you the direct 180 answer, the inverse of what you need in the text itself. But if they say they hypothesize the role is not blank, but rather it may actively support, maybe they're telling us it is not inactive, excuse me, or not active, right? So tone can be helpful. So not active, maybe that's a negative, maybe it's a little neutral. We know that we're describing the role with the word in the blank as an adjective. That's usually what we do. But I'll ask the group again here. There's actually a word that's already in the paragraph that is the right answer. Which word do they give us in the text that could plug directly into the blank?
Functionless?
Functionless, exactly right. Very simple. So the role isn't functionless, but instead, rather, it may actively support diving mechanisms. Well, now, if we take a look at our options based on our predictions, this is going to be a lot easier. Now, most students, most people, when they see this, latent, they don't know what that means. So let's ignore it. I don't know. If I don't know what it means, I can't like raise my hand and ask the teacher, hey, teacher, what is latent? I can't use ChatGPT on my phone to look it up either, right? So I'm just going to ignore that right now. And I'm going to focus on the words that we do know instead. This is most of the time what happens for most students, right? Which is that there's going to be 3 words you know, 1 word you've never seen before in your life. Cool. You can still get the answer right. We can prove one of these answers right, or we can prove 3 of them wrong and pick the other one. So replicable, maybe we're not certain of that, but able to be replicated, able to be repeated. That surely doesn't mean functionless. Predetermined, well, pre, of course, meaning before. Something predetermined is decided in advance. That doesn't mean functionless either. Therefore, I need to focus more on operative. Operative would be the 180 answer here, right? Operative is the direct opposite of the thing I'm looking for. Operative means not just functional, but like necessary, right? Essential to function. So then it doesn't really matter what D is if I know what D means or not. I know that A, B, and C are wrong. Therefore, D is my answer. And what is D? Latent directly means inactive, something that is dormant or not functioning in this moment. So its role is not latent, but rather it may actively support diving mechanisms. So that's just a quick taste test, right, guys? Word and context is a huge headache for most students. And especially working around the gaps in your vocab can be one of the biggest problems when we work on these questions. But the key to anything on this exam, but especially word and context, is to focus on what you know instead of what you don't. So if you stay focused on the structure and how you analyze the text and you make good predictions about what belongs, you'll usually be able to get to the right option. Anybody have a question on number 5 before I go to 23? All right. Well, so that we don't take up too much of your time this evening, let's take a look at number 23. This is an extremely different question type. This comes from the writing back half of the module. This is going to be our conventions of standard English. Which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English? So when I work on these, I know just by looking at the differences in the answers, this is testing me on grammar and punctuation, right? So A has a comma, B has a semicolon. I know it's a little hard to read there. C is simply a period, and D has nothing at all. That tells me I'm being tested on the punctuation in this sentence. The sentence starts here. Let me just ignore all of this then. I don't care about Earth and being a time, none of that junk matters, right? All I care about is the grammar of the one sentence where the blank is that I'm attacking. So I'm immediately going to ignore everything else there. There's another pro tip here. There's a reason I've chosen this question in the first place, guys, which is that a period requires a complete sentence both before and after it. A semicolon, like we see in B, the punta comma, also requires a complete sentence before and after it. You cannot have two correct answers on the SAT. You can auto-eliminate B and C. Don't even have to check the grammar. And if I do check the grammar, you'll find that there's not a complete sentence after. Before, yes. After, no. We can say that the verb in the second half of the sentence would be lags. The subject is the planet's rotation. But whenever time, not the rotation. I'm reading too quickly there. Whenever time based on the rotation lags. So whenever is a subordinator, turning this into a dependent clause. That's neither here nor there. We don't need to dig too deep into the grammar here. B and C have to be wrong because they're literally twins. You can't have two right answers. You can only have two wrong ones then. So therefore, B and C we can auto-eliminate. Now, it's just down to figuring out whether the comma sounds good. And some of you guys may have learned that commas are where we pause in the sentence. That's true. So if you read the sentence and pause there, you put the comma or not. That is definitely not a system that is repeatable for explaining why a comma works and doesn't. I know that a lot of students will get some questions right by just using that pause trick, but that ultimately is going to lead you into traps that the exam will very directly set for you. So instead, there's a few rules that I teach to every single student for how you can prove why commas work and don't. So the first one is it an introductory comma? Is it before the independent clause? Well, the subject of the sentence is an extra leap second. Specifically then has an introductory comma. This is the introductory, so then it can't be introductory in A. Likewise, it's not a comma fanboys. It's not a coordinating conjunction connecting two independent clauses. So I can take that rule away. Two other rules then. One is a simple one. We all know it. Listing, right? Well, if we read through the sentence, it's clearly not listing anything. So there's only one possible rule that could apply to the comma in A. And that rule would be saying that it is some non-essential information. Some of you guys may have learned that you put commas before and after something when it's non-essential. But in fact, you can use one comma to show that everything from the comma to the period is non-essential. If I said, I live in Mexico City, the capital of Mexico, and my adopted home, right? Well, I live in Mexico City is the independent clause. It's the main part of the sentence. The capital of Mexico and my adopted home, is it helpful? Sure. But is it necessary? Definitely not. So that comma tells me everything from the comma to the period could be chopped off and taken out, and we don't lose anything essential to the meaning of the sentence. Well, if we check the comma in A, this comma right here would mean everything from the comma all the way to the period can be taken out. I'll leave it up to you guys then. Is the comma correct or incorrect? Can I chop off the sentence at the word added? Or is everything after added essential to the meaning of the sentence? Who thinks they know?
No.
Know what?
No, the comma cannot be used here. The text after the comma cannot be cut.
Exactly right, Franklin. So you cannot chop the sentence off at the word added. Everything from added to clocks is certainly needed. Let's just read it and just use our ear to tell. We'll take away this parentheses, but we'll say specifically, an extra leap second is added. Or specifically, an extra leap second is added whenever time based on the planet's rotation likes a full. Okay, we definitely need that information. Comma can't work. D is my best answer. So what I wanted to show you guys with number 23 here, this is a relatively easy question. I think a lot of you guys could have figured this out without any of my help. But when I train students to get better with grammar, the reason that we're like the reason that my students are excellent, elite at grammar questions is because we're not just figuring out how number 23 works and how it sounds. But what I'm doing is teaching you a system of rules and structure and skills you can apply to any question like this. So that instead of saying, well, I don't know, these punctuations sound weird, I'll get rid of them and pick D, you can follow a set of strategies that explains exactly why each answer is right or wrong. It's taking the guesswork out of the grammar questions so that you can explain A to Z, top to bottom, why answers work and don't. And if you work really hard to learn those rules, these questions become like your strength. This is one of the ways that we really raise the floor of any student's score, because you can say, I might get, absolutely hammered with some of the really hard questions on reading. There was so much poetry and advanced science terminology. I didn't understand so much of it. Who cares? I know if I get good with grammar, It's not about what the sentence means, but it's about how I attack the structure and the rules so that you can almost always get these types of questions right. So did anybody have a question on number 23? All right, y'all. Well, we are nearing the end of our session here, but I've got a couple other things I wanted to mention before I let y'all go tonight. All right. First, I would strongly, strongly, strongly recommend that everybody scans the QR code that you see right there on the screen. April 5th, we have a mega diagnostic where we are going to have, many students, hundreds of students even, taking a free practice test via Zoom so that you can take your first free practice test, see what your score is. Can't hurt. All it's going to do is take 2.5 hours out of your life. And trust me, it is time that's going to be well spent because it's going to give you a score to see where exactly you are at. And also then it is going to really help us if you decide that you want to learn more about next steps. It's going to help us to tell you and to help you design a study plan. Oh, great. You're starting at a 1350. Sweet. You're going to need this many hours and tackle these kinds of concepts with me or one of our other elite coaches, right? Maybe you're starting a little lower. You're starting at a 1050. You're starting at a 950. Cool. You're still going to need this many hours and this many sessions with one of our lead coaches, et cetera. So taking that diagnostic is always the first step to understanding more about what your current level is so that we can then step in and say, here's how we're going to help you, or here's how we can devise a plan to work together to get you where you want to be. So I really, really recommend it is free. There is no reason not to. Please sign up and come take one of our SAT diagnostics. April 5th via Zoom, we're going to have a proctored exam that you guys will be able to take. Really, really, really highly encourage doing that. The other thing that I'll let you guys know here, we've got 2 SAT test dates left this semester. May 3rd and June 7th are the national test dates. For any of y'all that are located in the States, there will, I believe, be at least 1 or 2 more school day exams that are going to be offered. So you may be able to take the exam rather than on one of these national official Saturday dates. You may be able to take it at your school as well. Definitely speak to your guidance counselor, whoever is the administrator in charge of setting up the SAT, to see if there will be other SAT dates available. Now, if you are, well, I guess we're in the spring semester now, it doesn't really matter, but if you're a junior, or even if you're a sophomore, there will also be, it should be 5 dates, I believe. This fall, we're gonna have dates in August, September, October, November, and December. So each of the 5 months for this, for the fall semester, there will be dates available. Obviously, you're not going to take it 7 times between now and then, but most students do end up taking the exam usually 2 to 3 times on average for the SAT. So you'll have plenty of opportunities between now and the heart of application season to sit for the exam. And that's that. So I'm happy to stick around for as long as y'all need to answer any questions you guys may have. I really do hope this was like helpful, informational, and informational, not a word, informative, helpful, informative, and sheds a little bit of light on some of the SAT kind of questions that most people have. So thank you guys very much for your time, for your attention. Again, feel free to stick around and ask me any questions you would need. And if not, I know there's a few students in here. Hopefully I'll be seeing some of you guys